Hello and welcome to the Believe Show. I'm Senya Myman and I'm here with Maggie Neale. Hi, Maggie.
Hi, Senya. How are you doing?
Very good. I'm thrilled that we have Maggie on, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about her before we start. So, Margaret Neale is the Adams Distinguished Professor of Management Emerita at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And I'm going to show you something right now. She is the co-author of the book Getting More. Awesome book. I've read it. I love it. I've reread it. I've highlighted Getting More of What You Want, how the secrets of economics and psychology can help you negotiate anything in business and in life. And Maggie's writing and research has focused on how folks can realize the synergy that exists when everybody comes together. So we'll be talking about all of these things today with Maggie. Hi, Maggie.
Hello.
So before the program, I asked Maggie if she was game to start with us on the silly questions, and she said she was, so here we go. Silly question number one. What did you want to be when you were growing up?
Well, it depends on when you ask that question. When I was about 4 years old, I wanted to be a doctor. Later on, that transmogrified into wanting to be the first woman bishop of the Episcopal Church. And eventually that transmogrified into being a physician again. And then I'm a PhD in organizational behavior, which was none of the above.
But you're a PhD in organizational behavior after having a couple of other careers.
Yes. I tried. I have an undergraduate and a master's degree in pharmacy and a master's degree in counseling psychology. And I did therapy for a while as a therapist. I also did therapy as a patient, but I did therapy as a therapist. And I got my PhD in organizational behavior and have been an academic since the early 1980s.
And so one thing that is really, really cool about people who have been students of Maggie or have worked with Maggie or have done research with Maggie is there's a whole system. There's a whole intertwined system of people who are Maggie people, which is really
nice. They're my students and my sort of surrogate children since that's part of the deal.
Next silly question. What is one of your favorite foods?
Well, I'm going to give you my favorite food in terms of the frequency with which I consume it. And it turns out that if you just followed me around and said, okay, what is the thing you eat most of? It would be grapes. And that's kind of weird, but that's, they're like easy. You can walk around with them. They're mobile basically. And pretty much now with our supply chain, I can get really good grapes year round as opposed to when I was growing up and they were special for August or September.
So some people like fruit, but you're very, very specific.
Oh,
grapes,
yes.
Grapes all the way. And our last intro question. High school can be a challenging time. Mm-hmm. What was the good part of high school for you?
Well, because high school was a challenging time, because I grew up in South Louisiana, and you can't tell from the podcast, but I'm actually really tall. I'm about 6 feet tall. And I grew up in South Louisiana where I was taller than the folks, the men on the basketball team, on our high school basketball team. So it was always a challenge because I spent most of my high school years either on my sort of squatting down in pictures so I didn't look like I was, a full head taller than everybody else in my class or every other woman in my class. But what that led me to do was to be extremely involved. And so I was, basically whatever you could be, I ran for. I ran the sweetheart court. I organized all sorts of things, the yearbook, that sort of thing. So I was very heavily involved in student activities, which served me well in subsequent years. So college and beyond. So.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So this thing that was started off as a, hey, I'm different, ended up, hey, I'm in charge of a lot of social and community.
I'm in charge of a lot of things. And what it gave me the ability to do was to organize. So great.
Yeah. The Belief Show. Mm-hmm. Maggie, what is it that you believe that others may disagree with you about?
Well, I'm going to focus on what I have found in my research that for many people is counterintuitive. And that is in the context of negotiations. And so if you ask most people to describe or create an analogy for negotiations, they're going to probably say something along in the domain of a battle. that it's a fight, right? I'm going to try to get stuff from you that you don't want to give me, and I'm going to try to keep you from getting my stuff. And what I want to suggest to folks, and I try, and I sort of, this is my own personal academic soapbox, is that if that's how you think about negotiations, you're really in an uphill climb, because what you have just done by that mindset is set yourself up for conflict, for failure, and for disappointment. And that rather than thinking about negotiations as a battle, if you can reframe how you think about this type of engagement to being collaborative problem solving. And a lot of folks think they know what that is, and they'll say things, oh, I read that book, Getting to Yes, Win-Win Negotiation, Rainbows, Unicorns, Group Hugs. That's not what I'm talking about. When I talk about collaborative problem solving, what I'm suggesting is problem solving, not selling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't know why I said that.
Collaborative problem solving is, number one, I as the protagonist, primary, from my perspective, we're talking about that what I have is I'm going to be better off through the interaction. I'm going to be better off than my status quo, better off than my alternatives, better off than had I not negotiated. So that's number one. Number two is that I need to understand my counterpart, because negotiations are an interdependent process. I can't force you to say yes. There's no command and control in negotiation. All I can do is present proposals to you where you think it's in your interest to say yes. And so what that means is I need to understand that from your perspective, any proposal that I make has to at least keep you whole or perhaps make you better off. That's number two. Which means, of course, I need to understand who you are, what your interests are, what your preferences are, what your problems are. And then third, and probably the most specific aspect of this collaborative problem-solving perspective is that when I make a proposal, I'm going to frame that proposal as a solution to a problem that you have, not me. See, in negotiations, we get all caught up in, am I going to win? What's in it for me? How much can I walk away with? And the reality is that because you're going to create proposals, but the other side has to voluntarily walk the path of agreement with you. So you've got to be able to frame that proposal so that it's easy for them to say yes to your proposal. So the best way, listen to what they say to you, understand what their problems are, and then be creative. Frame your proposal as a solution to a problem that they have.
As a solution for them, not as a solution for what you're trying to get out of this collaborative problem solving. Yeah. One of the things that I've always loved hearing you say, and it's in your book, is that any situation can be a negotiation. Any situation can be collaborative problem solving. It doesn't have to be at work. It doesn't have to be at home, but anything can be that way.
Well, and especially because if you take the normal perspective of negotiation as a battle, then you're going to have to pick and choose who you negotiate with based upon who you're willing to fight with. And that dramatically limits what you think of as negotiation possibilities. But if you embrace this collaborative problem-solving perspective, you're not fighting anybody anymore. Now you don't have to pick and choose who you're going to negotiate with based upon who you're willing to fight. You can negotiate with everybody because you're helping folks solve problems.
When you're doing the collaborative problem solving, and you've decided that you're going to do it, what about if the other side has no interest in doing collaborative problem solving?
Doesn't matter. Here's the reason why. Because you see, what you're doing is you're saying, I don't negotiate. I solve problems. So imagine if you were someone who's engaged with me, for example, at work, and I start interacting with you. It's really easy for you to dismiss what I'm doing because I teach negotiations, I write books in negotiations, I do research in negotiations. So when I was, for example, an associate dean at the business school, every time I walked into a conversation with one of my colleagues, they said, you're negotiating with me. And I go, no, I might negotiate with those people out there, but we're problem solving. I'm not negotiating, right? Because what I don't want to do is to get them thinking about this battle mentality and be ready to fight with me. Right. So I'm solving problems. So let's find a creative solution to a problem that you have or that we have.
Maggie, something that comes up quite a bit on these programs is we often have people who are managers in technology that listen to these programs, and sometimes things that come up are, how do I negotiate my promotion? How do I negotiate when I'm looking for a job? So can you talk a little bit about that, especially when it gets to the end where they're actually negotiating, but from the framework of collaborative problem solving?
Sure. Here's the problem. Here's the other thing that people believe that are not true, and that is, most folks think about the way you should negotiate is you should negotiate issue by issue. You identify the issue you want to negotiate, salary, for example, and that's all you negotiate. And then you go on to the next one if there is another one, right? And that strategy, while very common, is a recipe for value destruction. Because what happens is that when you negotiate issue by issue, it's really hard for you not to deteriorate that interaction into a battle. Who won the last one? Who's going to win this one? I win it or I lose it. And it's just a situation that doesn't allow you structurally to be able to create value. So what is it you need to do? You need to think about packages. Negotiate a package, not an issue. Because what a package negotiation does first is just think about the words. We can fight over this issue of salary, or let's craft a package that reflects the unique contributions that both of us bring to the table. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, what happens is now you can make trades within that package. That crafting of the package is how we think about, I'd like to be, so this is really important to me, so I would like more of this, but I'm also willing to give on this. So I can craft and make those trades. And as my economist colleagues would say, and my OB colleagues would say, you need to think about gains through trades, not fights, not just battling one to try to dominate, but rather to say, let's solve a problem, let's craft a package, we're going to adjust the package, but we're going to try to keep it at a package level because I want to be able to make exchanges between high value items and low value items for me and high value items and low value items for you.
For you. So all of that makes sense in the context of once you're already talking about the package. How do you structure that negotiation so that the person, your manager for a promotion or a person you're getting hired into, so that that person actually embraces that similar mindset or really doesn't feel about it like a battle?
Well, they could say, we'd like to talk about your compensation. And you said, well, that's really great. I have a couple of ideas that might make this an easier conversation to have. And I'm going to talk about the other issues. Maybe what I need is a bigger marketing budget or a better tech budget, or maybe I need the opportunity to work from home. Those are all things I might craft into this sort of whole of what I want to think about, which will, and I characterize it as this package can help me help you, right? Because you're hiring me to solve, there's a reason you're hiring me. What are my strengths and skills and abilities? What problems do you have as a manager? Mm-hmm. And what resources do I need in order to help you solve your problems?
Yeah, so you're really having the discussion about both sides. You're not just saying, hey, here's what you've told me what you need, here's what I need. You're saying, okay, so it looks like this is what you need and this, and here's what would make sense for me. Where are we? How do we get close? Where are we?
Well, what you're saying, you really start this negotiation way before you get talking about compensation packages. You're beginning to get the basis for the negotiation when you're doing the interview and people are telling you about the challenges that the organization faces. And the question is, well, how do your resources, how do your skills and abilities, what do you bring to the table that can help mitigate those challenges? And now you use that language because they're the ones who've identified the problems. It's going to resonate with them. Use that language to clarify the kind of resources that you need to solve exactly the problems that they've raised. So, it's not something you do at the end. It's something that it's a mindset.
It's very iterative.
How you think about it.
Yeah. Maggie, I've worked with you. I've loved being a TA for you, and I thoroughly love your book. When you first came to these ideas that negotiations is actually not that, it's collaborative problem solving, what was the spark? What started that thinking for you?
It actually evolved from my work in trying to facilitate women being more effective in their negotiations. Because when women attempt to negotiate, they get a backlash. and they get a backlash because, and you may think this is hyperbolic, but I don't think it is actually. The role of a woman, especially in sort of, certainly in Western culture, and it may be true across other cultures, is to make people feel good. And if I'm talking about giving me more money in a negotiation, it's a battle, you're not feeling it, right? You're feeling bad. It's unpleasant. You're going to perceive me as greedy or demanding or not nice. And so there was some early research that was done that said women are going to be more effective in their negotiations if they pair their ask with a communal concern for the other. Mm-hmm. And I used to say that, but I never really understood how general that was, and not just for women. Because it's not that men all negotiate great, women all negotiate badly. It is that, in fact, folks have this sense of battle. It's easier for men to be in that domain, but it doesn't make it perfect, right? So what I say now is just get out of that negotiation. Because if I walk into a situation and I'm all ready for battle, I'm all girded up with my armor, you see that. And even if you weren't thinking this is going to be a fight, you're going to reciprocate that armoring up, right? So I'm going to come in, I'm not armored up. We're going to try to solve a problem here. We're going to do something that actually is collaborative rather than competitive. And yeah, I'm clever enough, and you're clever enough. We can figure out solutions that help us achieve what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a little bit like you phrased at the beginning. I am going to add value to what you already have. The whole point of this collab. Could you tell your story about the horses, that after you are done teaching an MBA class and you work with horses? Because that's, like you said, you're geared up for battle. The other person will reciprocate that.
Well, what you're talking about, I think, is the story that I discovered that I couldn't go out and work with my horses after I had taught. Because what happens is when you're teaching, I had classes that range in size from 48 MBAs to some classes that were like 75 MBAs. In order to be able to control, and this was during in-person classes, right? In order to control that, you had to get really big, right? I had to be really a very loud presence in the class to manage the dynamic and to get people to move in the direction I needed them to move, and to get them to sort of contribute when I needed them to contribute, and to be quiet and listen to me when I needed them to be quiet and listening to me, right? So it requires a great deal of physical presence. And I remember the first time I went back to try to work one of my particularly sensitive horses, I went in and we were in a round pen, and we'd done this 100 times before, but I kind of strided out there and I asked her to start moving, and she started not at the usual quiet trot, but at a dead run, and she was circling very, very fast. And I'm thinking, what is going on with her? Why is she so scared? It was clear, because her head, normally when you want the horse to kind of have an angle that kind of follows the way they're moving, and her head was pushed out, trying to get away from me, but the fence was stopping her, so she was running sort of bent the wrong way. And so I just realized that what happened is that I had not come down from my class, and that in her mind, which is absolutely true, because she's a nonverbal entity, right? So if in her mind I was screaming at her, and she's like, I don't know why you're screaming at me. And so she was trying to get away from me, but of course we were around him, so she could only just run in circles. So I stopped and said, oh, wow. So I basically backed off, lowered the intensity of my body. And that could be just like going from here to here, right? That change she saw, right? Or stepping back away from her, not impinging upon her space, to give her a chance to take a breath. So, and also that works with students too. Sometimes you have to kind of get up and sort of be in their face, and sometimes you back off and let them talk.
I love that story, because it's so physical. And sometimes I've heard you also mention horses are prey. They know what it's like to be prey. And even if we're not lions, but we're having this big presence, they can sense that kind of thing.
Oh, listen, we may not be lions, but what we're asking them to do is let us put the hide of a dead animal, a cow, right, a leather saddle on their back. Let us jump up on their back, which is what a cat would do if they were going to go to kill them by severing their spinal cord. Oh, yeah. They don't think of us as predators.
That's awesome.
They may not think of us as predators, right? But what they've learned is we don't, you basically teach your horse that this is okay. And you can trust me and that I won't let you get into trouble. And that's what happens when you have a connection with your horse, is the horse realizes that that this is a partnership and they have a certain set of responsibilities, as do you. And when you have that with your horse, it's magical.
So it's collaborative problem solving with your horse.
Oh, yeah. Well, Cynthia, just as a little pitch, I do have a TEDx talk on negotiating with my horse Sal. So if you go to YouTube and look up, you can find one of the challenges that I had with Sal, who's my bestest ever horse. Don't tell Cassidy that. But the challenges that I had when I forgot the principles of negotiation.
We will put that in the link in the show afterwards. We'll do that. Maggie, before I ask sort of our closing questions, it went too fast. The time with you went too fast. Before I ask our closing questions, sort of as a thought of is there something on this idea of collaborative problem solving and negotiations, something different that you would like to share with the people here today, something we haven't covered that you think is just an additional useful thing to keep in mind?
Well, I think that one of the challenges is that it's really hard to embrace this perspective because we have been so schooled for so long that negotiation is a fight. And so one of the things I would also strongly encourage your listeners to do is to really focus on thinking systematically about how to prepare for a negotiation. And in the book, there are 2 chapters on preparation. And that's 2 out of 14. So, it's a big component of what is important in negotiation. Because if you prepare for a negotiation, you actually increase the likelihood that you're going to be more in control of that process. And you're not going to kind of revert to your animalistic instincts of fighting, right? So it gives you a step up to just make it more likely that you will be able to engage in this collaborative problem-solving approach because you've thought about it, you've set up a structure and a system, and now you have to implement it.
And part of your thinking about part of your preparation, a huge part is, what does the other party want? What is the other party thinking? So you're already doing the perspective taking even before you get into the iterative.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely, you should. And as a general rule, think about allocating twice as long to prepare as you would think you would have to negotiate. And that's a very conservative rule of thumb. It might take you more, but at least if you do twice as much. So if you think it's going to be a half-hour negotiation, that's an hour of prep time. If you think this negotiation is really complex and it may take 6 months to get through, then you're talking about a year in advance when you start preparation.
Our last question. If you could snap your fingers and almost everyone were to take some action, almost everyone in the world, you have that power, what would you want that action to be?
I'd like people to ask for what they want. And the reason I say that is because for so many of us, we think, well, I don't want to ask because nobody will accommodate. And it turns out that both empirically from a research perspective and from a social reciprocity perspective, we human beings actually would like to accommodate other people's requests to the extent that we can. But if you don't ask, I don't know what you want. And if you don't ask for what you want, who will ask for what you want, right? So, I just think there's a real benefit to letting people know what it is you'd like. And there's a whole lot more levels and layers of aspects of negotiation, and there's tons of research, but at its most basic, the power of the ask.
So you're saying don't have people try to mind read what you want or draw hints.
Human beings are terrible mind readers. So don't do that. And I think what happens is you'll be surprised. If you start asking for what you want, you'll be surprised how often people will say, oh, okay, sure, no problem.
You know, it's so funny. What that reminds me of is back when my kids were very young and you're supposed to put them to bed at around 6 months of age, and you're supposed to be very consistent, like follow through. So you put them to bed and you walk out. It's not like put them to bed and check, but you walk out. You give them the sense of you believe they're going to fall asleep as you walk
Yes.
out. And I have that sense from you. You ask with the belief, hey, this person will do it if they can.
If they can. And they may not be able to, or they may not want to. But the point is, if you don't ask, and this is the thing I tell many of my students, look, you're afraid to negotiate, right? So you're already at a no. So why don't you ask? Because you can't be any worse off, because they could say no, but you're already there, right? So what have you got to lose?
Exactly. Maggie, thank you so much. It's been awesome having you here. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me, Cynthia. Great.
All the best, everyone. Thank you.
Take care.